Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my channel, The Bishop's Interview. I am Nathan Hinckley, also known as Bishop Hinckley. So, over the past few weeks, I've done a lot of interviewing other people and hearing their story and have had a great time. But I feel like there's quite a bit of my own story that I haven't told yet. And I think I would like to take this opportunity to do that, specifically addressing why I left the Mormon Church. As a little bit of, I guess, backstory, I've loved being Mormon. It's been my identity. Um, we have always attended. There's never been a period of time in our lives that we did not attend church. That goes back to me being a kid. Did all of the things that a good Mormon boy would do, from attending seminary and uh, Eagle Scouts, and of course, dating in the church, EFYs and youth conferences. And here's a picture of my, at the time, girlfriend and I, of course, member of the church. And I mean, it was just not any question of you know, that I would want to date and marry in the church, and for that I'm very grateful, obviously. But so I wanted to back up a little bit. About 8 years ago or so, I had a non-member friend, and he kind of reached out to me in a vulnerable way, and he was like, "Man, I really want what you have." you know and I'm like listening to him, and he's like, "You have a family, and you're blessed," and all of this. He went on and on about how he saw my life, and my response to him was that I owed it all to the church, essentially. And of course I used that opportunity to try to convince or convert him. I've thought about that experience over the past couple years, and while there's a lot that I am grateful for to the church, uh, I don't think that I should have given it quite the, I guess, the credit for the good things in my life necessarily. Um, Anyways, so I, of course, was met my now wife, but then girlfriend, Amy, and we dated until I went on my mission to Argentina for a couple years. There I am preaching on the street. And when I returned home, we were married 6 weeks after I returned, and we started married life. And not long after that, I found myself in some leadership callings at church, but we definitely started having our kids. And all of our family vacations, not all, but most, have revolved around church things, whether it was going to Palmyra or Nauvoo, or for just visiting the Nashville temple. Whatever it was, we've always um, tried to do things that would instill the same love and respect in for our kids that we have had for our church. When each of our kids turned 8 years old, me being a photographer and a videographer, we've made a big deal out of their baptism so they could always remember this day, that they'll have nice pictures. And you see, even we did high quality Mormon message type videos, and just really wanted them to understand the important step that baptism was. So I say all of this just to say that we were all in. We have been all in our whole lives up until for 45 years. So I served as bishop, and had a lot of good times. Here's a one of our Pioneer Day activities that was a little bit over the top. We had a photographer friend come in and take some professional pictures, and we did. We really had a good time with that type of stuff. So everything in our lives revolved around the church. There had been times growing up that I attended some other churches with a music group that I had, and I've stood up in the middle of Baptist congregations and basically told the preacher in front of his entire congregation that he was lying when he mentioned something about how Mormons wouldn't go to heaven or whatever it was. So I've defended the faith, I've lived it, and I've loved it. Um, as far as a shelf item, we talk about finding things out and putting them on a shelf. I really didn't have a whole lot of that. One thing I would mention is that I became, I guess, a fanatic about whitewater kayaking. I absolutely loved it. And this is just a picture of me coming down a river in the Smoky Mountains. But I started to realize that when I was out in the mountains and sometimes alone, which wasn't exactly the safest thing, but regardless, I realized that I felt closer to what I would have said to God, that I felt his presence more in my life and more at peace than I ever have at church or in the temple. And it just kind of caused a little bit of cognitive dissonance to think that our temples are supposed to be so, so special, but I've never felt anything like I did out, in nature. So that was just a little bit of a time when I, just kind of wrestled with that. But that certainly was not the reason why I left. And so I'd like to discuss that now. So really, it came down to initially, it came down to really these four topics. And I was blindsided by some of these things. I researched everything that I could. I looked at the apologetic responses, and just have never been able to square these things away. The Book of Mormon, the first vision, polygamy, and prophets. And of course, those are just normal topics in Mormonism, but I'd like to discuss some of the things that I found out early on in this deconstruction that really caused a problem. So my second cousin, 3 times removed, Gordon B. Hinckley, he said this quote, and actually lots of quotes like this, that each of us has to face the matter. Either the church is true or it is a fraud. There is no middle ground. It is the church and kingdom of God or it is nothing. And there's some similar quotes regarding the Book of Mormon, that it's exactly what Joseph claimed it was, or that it's essentially a fraud. And so when I came across some of these issues, I started to wonder if it is a fraud. And so the late war, the view of the Hebrews, the tree of life, and New Testament verses in the Book of Mormon. The late war was actually a huge just gut punch to me. And I know I brought this concern to a very close family member, and I was like, look at this. And she's like, oh, well, how do you know this, this book even exists? And if it does exist, how do we know that Satan didn't encourage Mr. Gilbert Hunt to write this? And because it's that hard to square away. And so basically, the late war was a book that was written for school kids back in the early 1800s. It was written in a biblical language. And the way I understand it, it was to try to encourage the kids to take more of an interest in the Bible. But it was a book about the war between the United States and Great Britain. So there was a study done, and that particular book came back with a lot of, it was a word analysis, and it came back with a lot of hits, more so than almost any other book. And so I just want to open up and share this screen of the late war so you can see Um, if you go to this page, this literally scrolls on and on and on. There are so many. There are so many of these examples um, about how the late war and the Book of Mormon correspond with each other. And if we just kind of scroll down, I mean, we see simple stuff, just like even the way the date is listed, the fourth day of the seventh month, which is, you know, and that was in the late war. And then the Book of Mormon, the fourth day of this seventh month, which is, just stuff like that that's odd. Odd that it was the exact same date too, but um we have stuff like the stripling warriors. So like in the late war, we see that it's let me pull it up here. Yeah, so it's 2,000 hardy men. They were volunteers, which interestingly refers to the Tennessee Vols, where I'm from. But anyway, the 2,000 hardy men, that they were of dauntless courage, and goes on to say how they fought desperately and they were stripling. Well, over in the Book of Mormon, we have 2,000 of these men who are valiant for courage, and that they fought most desperately and they were stripling. All that's quite quite odd. Then we see down here in the late war, we have the band of sea robbers and their wickedness. In the Book of Mormon, we have a band of robbers and talks about their wicked part. Um, we have pitching tents. Let's see. In the late war, we have um, the waters of the Great Lakes, on the borders of which they had pitched their tents. And in the Book of Mormon, they did pitch their tents in the borders of the beach by the seashore. Oh, burning the martyrs in both. Um, oh, let's see here. Yeah, so there's this mention of the what we call the anti-Nephi Lehis in the Book of Mormon, where it was that they would not take up their arms with their brethren, and that they buried their weapons basically. And in the late war, there was it talks about how they were savages who had been instructed in the ways of God, and that they raised neither the tomahawk nor the scalping knife. So it's just the same idea, I guess. Let's see, the three Nephites. There was also the three uh, Indian prophets. Let's find some of the better ones. Oh, okay. This is good. In the late war, it talks about taking tall trees from the forest to make these vessels, and that they put windows in these, these ships. Basically, it calls them barges, and also mentions the ark here. And in the Book of Mormon, of course, we know this story with the Jaredite barges that, of course, they took the length of a tree. They prepared these vessels, and that they said that they couldn't have windows, so they had to do it in another way. And they were tight, like unto the Ark of Noah. So it's just continues to have just example after example of things in common. This cause of liberty in the late war, we know that's a big part of the Book of Mormon, that they raise the flag, and it talks about it's for the cause of liberty. Let's see, using lion figuratively, the specific mention of Christopher Columbus. We're all familiar with that in the Book of Mormon, but here in the late war, it talks about Columbus and that he had traveled many thousands of miles. Oh, it goes on and on. We have the Liahona in the Book of Mormon. We know that's it's this round ball of curious workmanship of made of fine brass with the two spindles. And in the late war, they have something that's made partly of brass, partly of iron, and were cunningly contrived with curious works, like unto a clock, as it were a large ball. That sounds quite similar. Here it talks about tender women and fairest work of God, and that's in the late war, and these fair daughters in the Book of Mormon, that they're tender and tenderness and fair daughters. And oh, you could literally spend a few hours going through each of these, but simple fact is that these things should not be there. Oh, here's this negative question stuff, and everyone that's familiar with the Book of Mormon knows that. Like, know ye not, or do you not remember? And are we not all beggars? And apparently there's a lot of that in the late war. Oh, anyway, each one of these buttons opens up into a lot more too. So, uh, suffice it to say that there's quite a few uh, problems here. Let's see. We have the view of the Hebrews. So just listen to this short little thing that I had found that's kind of a synopsis of the view of the Hebrews. Originally published in the 1820s, of course, we remember the Book of Mormon came out in 1830. It tells of a migration of a group of Jewish people from Jerusalem to the uninhabited American continent by boat, having a single common Hebrew linguistic and ancestral origin for all Native Americans. A division of those people into civilized and uncivilized groups, inspired prophets teaching a monotheistic religion, wars between the two groups resulting in the total annihilation of the civilized portion, and a buried book telling their history written in the form of Egyptian hieroglyphics. That is the Book of Mormon. I mean, it's not. That's actually the view of the Hebrews, but that is the general idea of the Book of Mormon. That should not be there. All right, let's keep going. So, B.H. Roberts, this was about 100 years ago. He did a study for the Brethren. He was a faithful church member, church historian, and member of the 70. And he had done a study and called a meeting and said, guys, we have a problem. And this is what he said. He referring to the view of the Hebrews. Did Ethan Smith's view of the Hebrews furnish structural material for Joseph Smith's Book of Mormon? It has been pointed out in these pages that there are many things in the former book that might well have suggested many major things in the other. Not a few things merely, one or two, or a half dozen, but many. And it is this fact of many things of similarity and the cumulative force of them that makes them so serious a menace to Joseph Smith's story of the Book of Mormon's origin. Yes, B.H. Roberts, it does. When we have been told our entire life that this was a book taken out of the ground and written on gold plates, and that Joseph simply translated it from one language to another, and then to find out all of these direct connections to other books, that's a problem. And so just quickly, let me mention the Spalding manuscript, and it actually might be some of the more just obvious examples, but we have things like that it was both written in a Bible language, both pretend to be records of events that actually occurred, both were written by individuals who actually lived during the events being related. Um, both were deposited for safekeeping by the historian themselves. Both had were buried in the ground and had the cover pried off. Both were about people that crossed the ocean sailing a vessel, that a storm arose and they had to pray and calm the storm. Oh my gosh. Both talked about manufacturing tools from steel. Both has coins of and their own type of money, robbers in the land. Both were divided into two major civilizations. You know, I don't need to go on. There's just too many obvious correlations and identical pieces of the outline of the book. That should not be. And so a lot of people, when I've raised these questions, they are like, well, come on, man. You are acknowledging that it's not an exact copy. And that is true. It's not. And so they'll say, well, what are you even trying to say then? And this is my point, is not claiming that he copied it directly word for word, but rather it's just the existence of these books that are a problem for me. The fact that these books exist and they have a very similar storyline is super problematic, especially considering one of the books was supposed to have been written 2,000 years ago, while the others were written 200 years ago, right before the Book of Mormon, and just so happens to all of them come from the same geographical area that the Book of Mormon came from. So really, when it comes right down to it, I do not know how he wrote it and how he took his inspiration or whatever from these other books. But to kind of answer that question, this is a picture of a drawing that my little nephew did of, I don't know, 8 or 9 years old. He was not looking at anything. He has photographic memory or some other ability to do things that we just don't understand. His brother has similar things. And so just because someone can do something that we don't understand how they do it doesn't necessarily mean that they are a prophet of God. It just means that we don't know how they did it. And so you might say the same thing about the Book of Mormon. I don't know how he did it. There's some good parts to it. There's some uplifting and some deep ideas. There's also parts that are horrible, like telling a man to cut off someone's head, put on his clothes, and do all that because you had a feeling, right? So, it is what it is, but just because we don't understand how he did it doesn't mean that it makes him a prophet. All right, so the next point would be the first vision. Now, when people hear that there's problems with the first vision, usually they're referring to the multiple accounts, because we know that Joseph's story changed and kind of evolved. That's actually not what I'm referring to. Interestingly, well, let me go ahead and put this up here. So I know I have Joseph's account memorized in both English and Spanish. The whole, I saw a pillar of light above the brightness of the sun, which descended gradually, and all of that. We were told that it was a singular event, that all of humanity hinged on this one humble prayer from this pure-hearted, pure-minded boy, right? We can just hear that in a conference talk right now. Imagine my surprise when I come across that there were multiple, and not just 2 or 3, but LDS Living acknowledges that there were at least 20 other, in Joseph Smith's day, 20 other accounts, all from mostly from his region, of people claiming to see God or Jesus Christ. And LDS Living acknowledges that that God the Father and Jesus Christ appeared to many people in Joseph's day, at least 20. And so this is an account of a man named Snorris Stearns from Massachusetts. And if you just look, I mean, we could read the whole thing, but just kind of look at the essence of what he's saying. He's saying that there was a sweet flow that gradually increased. Of course, he's praying at this point and wanting to know about his eternal, soul. And this sweet flow increased, and a small gleam of light appeared. It was above the brightness of the sun, and it grew brighter and brighter until, lo and behold, I saw two spirits. One was God, my maker, almost in the bodily shape like a man, and his face were a flame of fire. Below him stood Jesus Christ, my Redeemer, in perfect shape like a man. His face was not ablaze. Goes on to say that it surpasses all bounds of description. I sent this account without saying who it was to a member of my family. I said, "What do you think about this?" And he said, "Oh yeah, I know there's lots of different versions of Joseph's first vision." I'm like, "Dad, it's not Joseph's first vision. This is Snorris Stearns. And our own church acknowledges, oh yeah, this has happened 20 times. That's just not the story we were told. We were told that Joseph claimed he had these visitations and visions and that the whole town started to persecute him, right? That the Mormons were always being persecuted because no one believed Joseph. Not so. It sounds to me like this was as common, as anything during the day, just to claim that you saw God or Jesus. And maybe these people did, but their accounts, especially with Joseph's, who came after these accounts, are very strangely similar, especially in the way that they describe it. All right. So the next one I would say would be the tree of life. And I think most people will be familiar with the tree of life story from the Book of Mormon. It's pretty early on in the book, so most of us at least get that far. But Lehi is whisked away by a heavenly messenger and shown this vision, and there's a tree, and there's a rod of iron, and there's a river of water, and a building, and people mocking. And then he goes on to say what everything represents. It's a beautiful, beautiful story. Well, unfortunately, 19 years before the Book of Mormon was published, Joseph's father, Joseph, he had a dream, and it impacted him so much that he wrote it down. And the way that we know that he wrote it down was that his wife, Joseph's mother, later in her life, she wrote a book, and she talked about all of the things of her history, and she recounted in his own words, she says, and then it has Joseph Sr.'s dream. And if you have not seen this, it is amazing. It is essentially the tree of life story from the Book of Mormon. It has all of the things: the tree and the rod and the river and the building and the mocking. And so I just think for a second, in my mind's eye, Joseph sitting there translating, and he's no doubt heard this story from his dad many, many times. We all know what happens when dad starts to tell his story again. Oh, there goes dad again, telling his this or telling his that. Or in this case, there goes dad again, telling about his dream. It must have been very commonly known in the family. What else did they do? They did nothing but sit around and tell stories. Matter of fact, in the same book, Joseph's mother says that Joseph, as a young boy before the Book of Mormon, would sit around and make up stories and entertain the family for hours upon hours about what? About the ancient inhabitants of America And she said, and he would describe their dress and their weapons and everything, what ends up being what the Book of Mormon is. But anyways, back to the tree of life. I'm just imagining Joseph sitting there with his head in the hat, reading off the rock, which was another part that we were never told before. But anyway, he's reading off the rock and Oliver's writing down, and they get to this part and he puts his hat down and he says, "You have got to be shitting me." And Oliver's like, "What do you mean? What do you mean?" And he's like, "This story that I'm translating and reading off this rock and you're writing down is my dad's story. It's the exact same story. It's the tree, it's the river, it's the rod, it's the building." And he would have been over the moon. It would have been proof. It would have been absolute proof that they were doing the Lord's work. Matter of fact, they could have used this to convince others. Hey, here's my dad's dream. Here's this book. It has to be true. The problem is, he would have ran home and, "Hey, Dad, check this out. Your dream, it's in this book," whatever. The problem is that never happened. The rest of that story never happened. It was never mentioned. We never have heard about Joseph Sr.'s dream until recently, since it's been all over the internet. Guess who? LDS Living also acknowledged that Joseph Smith's father saw the Tree of Life 19 years before the Book of Mormon was published. That is a problem. That's a problem that we have. All of these other books that I just showed you, we have the Late War, the Spalding manuscript. We have all of these things showing up in the Book of Mormon. Now we have Joseph's dad's dream showing up in the Book of Mormon. These are problems. So not only that, we have New Testament verses showing up in the Book of Mormon. Now, honestly, this is kind of embarrassing. It's embarrassing that it took me that long to say, well, wait a minute. If these people left in 600 BC from Jerusalem and they came to the Americas, so they're in totally separate continents. And why would New Testament, which came much, much later, why would New Testament verses be showing up in the Book of Mormon? And so here's just a few examples. We have in Alma, where it talks about come ye out from the wicked and be ye separate and touch not their unclean things. In 2 Corinthians, come out from among them and be ye separate, saith the Lord, and touch not the unclean thing. So we're supposed to just accept the fact that these two people did not know each other, and they decided to write this particular verse exactly the same way, about come out from among them and be ye separate. I'm not buying that. No, not buying that. Here's another one. We have this is a good one in Alma. The axe is laid at the root of the tree. Therefore, every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit shall be hewn down and cast into the fire, even an unquenchable fire. In Matthew, we have the axe is laid into the root of the trees. Therefore, every tree which bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. It goes on to say an unquenchable fire. I've heard the apologetic responses to this. I've heard that there must be pulling from another source, stuff like that. But to see this terminology word for word, it's obvious that Joseph is using the New Testament as a basis. And if we would come out and be friggin' honest about this and just say what it is, then people wouldn't end up doing ridiculous podcasts like this one about that. Now, here's one more. This mortal body raised in immortality, this is from Alma, and this corruption raised in incorruption, stand before God to be judged according to the deeds which have been done in the mortal body. Well, that sounds a lot like Corinthians. For this corruptible must put on incorruption, and this mortal must put on immortality, and appear before the judgment seat of Christ. That everyone, you get the point. There should not be New Testament verses. Since then, I found out that there's errors that show up in the Book of Mormon that shouldn't be there, that are in the Bible, that would have corresponded to a specific King James version, which they would not have known anything about in the Book of Mormon time. So there's just lots of problems. Okay, polygamy. I'm not going to go into this whole rabbit hole right now, but suffice it to say, we have a huge black eye in our church about polygamy. And but you would say, well, then why are you leaving over this? Well, one of the thing that has come to light lately is the church has acknowledged Joseph's participation in polygamy. And so, of course, we're told about Fanny Alger and how even though the revelation on polygamy isn't even claimed yet, he's getting caught with her in the barn, and there's an excommunication of Oliver Cowdery over this whole thing. It's a mess. If you want to hear more about it, just listen to Lindsay Park on the year of polygamy. I mean, she goes through each wife, and it's quite frankly, it's heartbreaking. Polyandry is just something I had never even heard that word before, but this is when you marry another living man's wife. And the interesting thing about that is that if you've married another living man's wife, then she has also two husbands, which I guess in a way is kind of, payback or whatever, but it doesn't do a lot for raising up seed. Polyandry is a problem, and at least I think 12 or 13 of Joseph's wives were already married to other living men. The happiness letter to Nancy Rigdon, that's a train wreck. Basically tells her she won't be happy unless she agrees to marry him, and that her eternal salvation is at stake, and that of her family. The Partridge Sisters, just a ridiculous story. So basically, Joseph's already married to these two sisters, and Emma finally gets on board, and he's like, okay, Emma, well, you get to pick who I marry. Well, the Partridge Sisters were living in the house and helping out, and so she said, I don't know, just how about them then? They live here anyway. So even though he had already married them and she didn't know about it, he holds a mock ceremony and marries them again so that Emma feels like she's involved. Of course, that's totally dishonest to sit there and put on a show like that with her knowing nothing of it previously. A lot of this information came straight from the church's website, the Gospel Topic Essays. When I was bishop, I was randomly selected among bishops to give feedback to the church. And that's another one of those times that I came across some of this stuff that I was like, wow, I did not know that. And then the other thing is just quite ridiculous is this notion in the Gospel Topic Essays, how they're afraid to say that one of Joseph's wives was 14. So instead of that, they say she was several months shy of her 15th birthday. Well, that's got a name. The name for that is 14. Okay, let's go on. So prophets. Here we have a slide that someone has made teaching the primary kids all the living prophets, probably by name, probably making them all rhyme and all this rubbish. Here's all of our other prophets. So when it comes to prophets, it's basically a house of cards for me. And when I finally accepted the fact that prophets can be wrong, and I know that sounds obvious, but if you just think about the ramifications of that, like, okay, they can be wrong. Well, we could sit here for hours and pull out say racist quotes from our prophets, what would we say now? Oh, we would say, oh, he was wrong. He was given into the temptations of the day. The church has tried to distance itself from some of these things, but they were taught at the time. There may have been members at the time who opposed it, who were told that they were wrong and probably kicked out because the prophets were saying it. Same with polygamy, that it was a requirement to enter heaven. Now, no, it's not a requirement. We taught that Adam was God. That's the Adam God theory. It was taught for over 60 years in the temple that that was literally that Adam was God, and the church has now backed off of that. But it's like, well, so they were wrong, and the church would say, yeah, they were wrong. And so the question is, if they could be wrong then, what keeps them from being wrong now? And as you sit with that, it leads to a place of, well, nothing stops them from being wrong now. Like, why would I let what the current prophet says dictate what I do with my life? There's no reason, and as an example of that, we have Mormon. Well, we all know that President Hinckley loved to be called Mormons, and he said we should be proud of it. And I'm a Mormon boy, and Mormon messages, and meet the Mormons, and now our current prophet Nelson says that it's a victory for Satan when we take Jesus Christ's name out, and that we should not use that. So it's just shows that we should not trust these men as speaking literally for God. And that's the way that it has been sold to us over the years, that they literally speak to and for God. And I'm not just talking about to like in prayer. We have been taught that they literally face to face see God and Christ and receive his message. And that this church is the only church that has the authority, the priesthood to do baptisms. And it's been said that other churches are just playing church because they don't have the authority. And, it's these exclusivity claims of our church that make us, why can't we just be another church, just another group that's trying to, do good and teach to do good things? That's what we should be, but that's not good enough. We have to make these exclusive claims that it's the most correct book of any book, the Book of Mormon, apparently, even though it has so many similarities to other things and Joseph Smith Sr.'s dream, but it's the most correct book of any book. And that our church is the only true church on the face of the earth of which God is pleased. These are the reasons that I've left. That the church, I do not believe, is what it claims that it is. I do not believe that it's the only true church on earth. I do have very fond memories, many, many great friends and family, but I just go back to what President Hinckley shared, that it's either or, and it's black and white, and either exactly what it claims or it's nothing. And to me, it's been nothing for the past year and a half. And I would say it's not been easy. It was a lot easier before to just know all the, know the whole plan, where we came from, why we're here, where we're going, to not have any doubts and not have any questions, because we can just look up a quote from a prophet. But as I've shown, those quotes just fall apart. They're contradicted. They are in no time they'll be, we'll move on and say, oh, he was just speaking as a man, and that was just his own thoughts. And so I'm not interested in just an old man's opinions. If it's not speaking for God, like I've been told, then I'll make up my own mind and I'll be in charge of my own life and my own choices, instead of basing it off of old white men who may have some good ideas, but may not. And so those are the reasons that I initially left the Mormon Church. And over the past year and a half, I've done a lot of studying, and I've just kind of been overwhelmed with the layers, because there's so many layers to so much of it. The church has put forth this shiny, perfect, you know, this perfect picture of what the church is. And because they have chosen not to show the dirt and not to show the bad things and the times we've messed up, then it causes people to really doubt the honesty of the church, as we found out now that so much of what they've told us is not true or not accurate. Those are reasons that I've shared. Those may not be your reasons, and I would not want to try to convince anyone to leave. It may very well be the right thing for some people, but for me and for my family, it was causing harm, and for that reason, we have decided to leave. And thanks for joining me and for allowing me to share this with you. And I'll talk to you next time.